Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon. My name is Nurul Fitriani. I'm postgraduate student of Tadulako University in English Education Department, class of 2021. Today, I would like to do oral elaboration of English specific purposes final test who handled by Dr. Mawardin M. Said M. Home. Today, I would like to talk about what is ESP. ESP is a kind of English which relates to learner professional or personal needs, somewhat modulating the general English curriculum extents. The general English curriculum teaching deals mainly with teaching the language system, whereas the English for specific purposes teaching focuses rather on how the language is used in a real discourse. Uh, uh, in real discourse by the process which information about learning needs and learning theory and interpret to produce material depending on the syllabus to develop methodology for teaching to establish evaluation procedure in order lead the learner to attain the state of knowledge. There are some results of the need analysis and the course design and approach to syllabus and methodology and exacting material in an approach to language teaching which aims to meet the needs of particular learners. It means that in practice that much of the work done by ESP teacher is concerned with designing appropriate course for a various group of learners in order to provide a reasonable basis for the subsequent processes of syllabus design, materials writing, classroom teaching, and evaluation. It is important to concern on of concern to the question to know whether processes are reasonable or not. This whole question should include the three main headings, namely language description, theory of learning, and need analysis. In the second group, we talk about language description. Any ESP course makes use of explicit or implicit ideas about the nature of language. These ideas are drawn from the various language description that have been developed by studying schools of thought in linguistics. Now we have a number of ways of describing language available to us. It therefore important to understand the main feature of each of this description in order to consider how they can use most appropriately in ESP courses. In this part, we shall give a brief outline of various ideas about language that have influenced ESP in some way. There are six main stages of development. The first one is classical or traditional grammar description of English and other languages were based on the grammars of the classical language, Greek and Latin. This description were based on analysis of the role played by each word in the sentence. Language were described in this way because the classical language were case-based language where then grammatical function of each word in the sentence was made apparent by the use of appropriate inflection. Thus, the form of a word would change according to whether it was a subject, object, indirect object, and so on. And the second one is structural linguistic. In structural description, the grammar of the language is described in terms of syntagmatic structure, which carry the fundamental proposition, for example, statement, interrogative, negative, and imperative, and etc. And notion, for example, times, number, gender, and etc. By varying the words with the structural framework, sentences with different meaning can be generated. The method of linguistic analysis led in English language teaching to the development of the substitution table as a typical means of explaining grammatical patterns. There are still widely used today as this example from the Nucleus series. And the third one is transformational generative grammar. The structured view of language as a collection of syntagmatic patterns held sway until the publication in 1957 of syntactic structure by Noam Chomsky. Chomsky argued that the structural description was too superficial because it only described the surface structure of the language. This could not explain relationship meaning were quietly clearly there, but which were not realized the surface structure. Language can only be properly understood as a reflection of human thought process. Language learning is conditioned by the way in which the mind observes, organizes, and store information. In other words, the key to successful language learning and teaching not only in the analysis of nature of language, but in understanding the structure and processes of the mind. There are several theories of language itself. The first one is behaviorism, or learning as habit formation. The first coherent theory of learning was the behaviorist theory, based mainly of the work of Pavlov in the Soviet Union, of Skinner in the United States. The simple but powerful theory said that learning is mechanical process of habit formation and proceeds by means of the frequent reinforcement of a stimulus response sequence. The second one is mentalism, or thinking as a rule governed activity. The first successful assault on the behaviorist theory came from Chomsky in 1964. He taught behaviorism on the question how the mind was able to transfer was learned in the stimulus response sequence to other novel situation. His conclusion was the thinking must be rule governed. Set of rules enable the mind to deal with the potentially infinite range of experiences it may encounter. And then cognitive quote, learner as thinking beings. Learning then is a process which the learner actively tries to make a sense of data, and learning can be said to have taken place when the learner has managed to impose some sort meaningful interpretation or pattern on the data. This may sound complex, but in simple terms, what it means is that we learn by thinking about and trying to make sense of what we see, feel and hear. The fourth one is the affective factor, or learner as emotional beings. People think, but they also have feelings. It is one of the paradox of human nature that although we are all aware of our feeling and their effect on our action, we invariably seek answer to our problems in rational terms. It is as if we believe that human beings always act in logical and sensible manner. This attitude affects the way we see learner more like machine to be a program. Then people with likes and dislike, fears, weakness, and prejudice. But learners are people. Even ESP learner are people. They may be learning about machine and system, but they are still learn as a human being. And the fifth one is learning and acquisition. Uh, Much debate has recently centered on the distinction made by Stefan Krashen between learning and acquisition. Learning is a seen unconscious process, while acquisition process unconsciously. We have not this section paid much attention to distinction, using the two terms in interchangeable. This reflects our view that for the second language learner, both processes are likely to play a useful part, and that a good ESP course will try to explore more. And then the sixth one is a model for learning. In the light of the idea we have discussed, we will not present a model of the learning process which will provide a practical source of reference for the ESP teacher and a course designer. And then in the third group talk about ESP and the syllabus. A syllabus can tell us nearly everything we need to know about how a course will be run and what will be expected of us. There are several syllabuses differ by its function. The first one, the evaluation syllabus. This kind of syllabus will be most familiar as the document that is handled down by ministers or other regulation bodies. It is that what successful learner will know by the end of the course, and in effect it puts in the record the basic on which success or failure will be evaluated. It reflects on official assumption as to the nature of language and linguistic performance. For example, If the syllabus is framed in terms of grammatical structure, disrespect a view that knowing a language consists of knowing the constituent structure, it would be impossible to produce an evaluation syllabus without having a view what language in and thus how it can be broke down. And the second one is organizational syllabus. The syllabus states the order in which it is to be learned. It is more familiar in the form of the content page of a textbook. The organizational syllabus differs from the evaluation syllabus in that it carries assumption about the nature of learning as well as language, since in organizing the item in syllabus. The organizational syllabus, therefore, is implicit statement about the nature of language and of learning. It is necessary to consider factors which depend upon a view of how people learn. What is more easily learned and what is more fundamental to learning? Are some items needed in order to learn other items, or what is more useful in classroom? That is a point of evaluational organizing syllabus. And the third one is material syllabus. The first person to interpret the syllabus is usually the materials writer. So we get our third kind of the syllabus, the material syllabus. In writing materials, the author adds yet more assumption about the nature of language learning, and language use. The author decides the context in which the language will appear, the relative weightings and interrogation of skill, the number and type of exercise to be spent of any aspect of language, the degree recycling of or revision. These all have their effect whether and how well something is learned. For example, if certain vocabulary items are presented in text which appeal to the learner, they're more likely to remember because the learner attention will be more involved. And then the teacher syllabus. The second stage of interpretation usually comes through the teacher. The great majority of students in the world learn language through the mediation of a teacher. Thus, we have the teacher syllabus. The teacher can influence the clarity, intensity, and frequency of any item, and every effect of image that learn receive based on Tevfik in 1984 recount how an inexperienced teacher would finish in 2 minutes an activity that he would spend 20 minutes on. The kind of variety will infantability effect of degree of learner. And then the next one is the classroom syllabus. As every teacher know what is plan and what actually happens in a lesson are two different things. A lesson is a communicative event which is created by the interaction of number of force. The classroom then creates conditions which will affect the nature of a planned lesson. They may come from the learners as a group. Perhaps they are tired after a long day, excitable after an incident in the break. Individual students might hold matters up by asking questions or distracting the attention of the class. The classroom is dynamic, interactive environment which affect the nature both of what is taught and what is learned. The classroom thus generates in own syllabus. And then sixth one is the learner syllabus. The learner syllabus is the network of knowledge that develops in the learner brain, which enables that learner to comprehend and store the later knowledge. The learner syllabus belongs to the material syllabus. It is a retrospective record of what will be learned. And then the importance of learner syllabus in the fact that it is to the filter of the syllabus, the learner view the other syllabus. And then after syllabus there are material evaluation. After completed our need analysis and course design, the next step that should be done by the teacher is deciding what they will do. Teacher might turn the course design into actual teaching materials. There are three possible ways of turning the course design into actual teaching material. The first one is select from exciting materials, material evaluation, and then write our own materials or material development. The third one is modify exciting materials materials or material adaptation. Material design, we can start by asking ourselves the question, what are materials supposed to do? In defining the purpose of the material, we can identify some principles that will guide us to actual writing of the materials. Uh, after that, development in the theoretical base of language teaching were indicating a need to pay more attention to the individual learner, and at the same time the worlds of commerce and technology were producing of host people with specific language learning needs. uh, And the last stage of ESP is the manager of the ESP course, are accountable of the investor. There are two levels of evaluation have thus been brought in prominence. The first one is learner assessment. As with any language core, there is a need to assess students' performance at a strategic points in the course, for example, at the beginning and at the end. But this assessment takes on a greater importance in ESP because ESP is concerned with the ability to perform particular communicative tasks. The facility to assess proficiency is therefore central to the whole concept of ESP. The result of this kind of evaluation, for example, enables sponsors, teachers, and learners to decide whether and how much language tuition is required. And then course evaluation, a second important form of evaluation is the ESP course itself. The kind of evaluation help to assess whether the course objectives are being met, whether the course, in other words, is doing what it was designed to do. uh, And lastly, we move to the role of the ASP teacher, to consider in what ways the ASP teacher's lot differs from that of the general English teacher. We have stressed a number of times the need to see ASP within the context of language teaching in general, and this applies as much to the role of the teacher as to materials and methodology. Nevertheless, there are important practical ways in which the work of general English teacher and ESP teacher, there are two important differences that we have to consider. Firstly, ESP teacher role is one of many parts, prefers with some justification to use them ESP practitioner rather than ESP teacher in order to reflect the scope. It's likely that in addition, the normal function of classroom teacher is the ESP itself. The ESP teacher will have to deal with need analysis, syllabus design, material writings or adoption and evaluation. We do not intend it to go into this aspect in any further detail as I explained before. The second way in which ESP teaching differs from general English teaching is that the great majority of ESP teachers have not been trained as such. They need therefore orientate themselves to a new environment for which they have generally been prepared. That's enough for me. Thank you very much for the time and attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon.